Hi, thank you for joining. I'm Robin Carr and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to give our participants about a minute to join. So sit back, relax, we'll get started in just a moment. Thank you again for being here. Hi, if you're just joining, thank you for joining. We're just giving everybody a moment to get settled and we'll start shortly. All right, thank you again for joining. And for those of you that joined early, we appreciate you being here. I'm sure others will join shortly, but we're going to go ahead and get started for the sake of time. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping things to go over with you. First, if you have audio or video issues of any kind, it's really just easiest to exit, go to webinar and rejoin. That will resolve about 90% of any issues. If you have a topic specific question today, please place that in the question section in your GoToWebinar meeting, and we'll make sure that we have that ready for our Q&A session. If you need assistance of any other kind not related to the topic, those should be placed in the chat section of your GoToWebinar menu, and we'll be sure to answer that to you directly. Also, in 2024, we are offering handouts for the presentation. So in your GoToWebinar menu, you will see a section labeled handouts. You can download the handout of today's presentation at any time during the event. We'll hear from our speaker, Lee McClish, who we have been fortunate to have with us several times over the last years presenting in these best practices webinars. And then we're going to go to our Q&A session where we'll answer as many questions as we can in the time that we have available. So Lee is with us today, and Lee is currently the Director of Maintenance and Reliability for NTT GDC Americas, a global telecommunications and data center company. His previous positions were held at BASF, Graphic Packaging, and at Packaging Corporation of America as a reliability engineer, a maintenance engineer, an RCM manager, and a production manager. Lee also served in the U.S. Navy as a submarine officer, and he holds a, wait for it, BSME, MBA, CMRP, CRL, CPMM. And if that is not enough, Lee is also the author of a book. He has a book available in the reliability web area of Amazon, and that book is called Maintenance Leadership 101. Lee, thank you so much for being here again with us today. We're very excited to hear your topic today, culture. Can it be changed? Lee, take it away.
Yeah, thanks very much, Robin. Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. You know, this is a great topic, and I put a lot of thought into this over the last several years. I wrote an article for Plant Services that was published in the last November, December magazine. And so let me, without further ado, Robin already kind of went over all this stuff, but that's what the book looks like in case you're interested. So let's start out with a poll question just to get started here. All right, Robin, are you gonna be able to do the poll? There we go. I think it's important, you know, to consider what your culture is and at what level of the curve it could be. And it could be relative. It could be relative across the company, relative between industries. You know, there's a lot of factors, and we'll kind of talk about those. But I just want to kind of give a little idea of how where the audience is at. All right, do we have the results of the poll?
We do, and they are being shared, Lee. I'm not sure why you're not seeing them, but I'm happy to verbalize them for you.
If you would, please.
Sure. 54% say improving, 35% say tolerable, and 6% each say outstanding and on life support.
Okay. All right. So nobody in the outstanding area. So that's good. That's why you're here today. So this is the agenda going to kind of talk about, definition or the influence of culture, some positive improvements you can make, and I got a lot of personal examples over my career. So this is a standard definition from Webster's. Different people groups, different nations. There's always what I like to refer to culture as more of a personality. And since we're talking really about manufacturing, industrial plants, what is the personality of the team? Is there like a lot of fighting in a team? Do they all work together? If you got a problem, do people jump in, and help out? And how is the culture, the management culture? How easy do they set up processes, to make people's jobs easier, and those types of things. So I want to do one more poll here and see what the consensus is on the biggest impact on the culture. So there's no question all four of these have an impact. And so I want to kind of talk about each one a little bit. We'll see what people come up with or what they're thinking. So I would consider these, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Lee. I was just going to say we're at about 50% voted, so I'm going to give them just a moment longer.
Okay, thanks.
And I've closed the poll and are sharing the results now. Lee, if you don't see those, I can verbalize them again.
If you would, please.
Sure. 37% department managers and supervisors, 30% site plant upper management, 19% employees at the deck plate level, and finally 14% are corporate.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty even spread there. Okay. So I think corporate does have kind of an influence. You may have heard like the program of the month. They want you to some initiative that they decide on their own. Maybe not really, and they're probably just looking at the financial end of it. Maybe not the impact. I know one time we had to like limit our overtime to 10%. Across the board. And sometimes you can do it, sometimes you just can't. It depends on what kind of, failures that you have and things you have to respond to. And, the corporate also provides some policies and procedures, some ways of doing things. And depends on your management, how much they want to follow all those corporate guidelines or kind of, set their own. So upper management definitely has an impact. As you get a new plant manager, they're going to have their own priorities. Some of them may be, hey, I want to get promoted again. Maybe be an area manager in 3 years. It may be, hey, I'm here for the long haul. I'll wait till my kids get out of college. So I'm going to stay here. We just want to make this the best we can. So they can have a pretty big impact, on the culture within your plant. I think that, supervisors, managers also have certainly a big impact. All of them have a different leadership style. All of them have maybe different priorities. Again, personal priorities, how long they want to stay there. Maybe they're going to work there for 40 years and retire. So they're pretty embedded. All those factors have a big impact. And employees should have a pretty big impact. I mean, and it's not all just from internal to them, but it's these external factors that make them feel valued. What is their human capital? Are they listened to? Those types of things. So I think teamwork is a big thing. If people feel part of the team, they're going to jump in, they're going to try and make things better. And the policy procedures will help. If you have like emergency situations, Do you have a written procedure? Do you practice, have like a little drill time? Do you do a tornado drill, every so often? Those types of things are maybe external to the building. What if you had a fire? As a fire department, know your layout. All those things have an influence. Yeah, so those are all the major influences. So I think a big thing is communication. Hopefully your site has like an all hands kind of a call, or maybe once a month, once a quarter. Maybe have the plant manager, top management talk to you. Maybe they'll bring in, pardon me, some sales folks. Can I tell you, how that's going? Are we on track for the year? Do we have big accounts that we're looking at? People like to hear those kinds of things. Human capital, yeah, do the people feel valued? There are activities and things that kind of get teamwork going. Sometimes you have people go out and do like rope courses, or all kinds of different activities you can do as either department, maybe even a plant. All those really kind of help build that teamwork. And as any organization, you got to have good goals and objectives, that people understand where they're at. Everybody's on the same ship, it's all steering in one direction, but hopefully people aren't like moving in circles on that ship. Hopefully everybody's, looking ahead and they're identified well. And not only should it be identified plant-wide, pardon me again, but, in the department, and are they posted? Are you looking at downtime? Is there graphs showing downtime on different machines? Is there a safety goal? And of course, everybody has safety goals, but how are they broken down? Are you tracking near misses? That could have been, an OSHA recordable or a lost time accident. And challenges, if you had like an emergency, like one challenge I'm thinking of in one of my plants, the city was working on our main water supply, unbeknownst to me, and it was kind of in the back. You couldn't really even see where they were located at, and they punched a hole in the pipe, and so they ended up isolating it. So the entire facility didn't have any water, which means no production. And knowing our whole water system, our main supply came in from the back half of the plant, but for whatever reason, they ran all the fire hydrants in the front side of the plant, and it was a whole different supply. And it went down the road, supplying the fire, water to all the plants that are along that industrial parkway. So we were able to actually run a really long series of fire hoses from the front to the back of the plant and tie it into the domestic water supply. And it took a couple hours, but we were able to get water back and restart production. So when you have challenges like that, do people jump in? Who in your department jumps in? And of course, you want to reward folks that really get engaged and help out and things like that, and recognize, people. All that kind of helps with their culture. Suggestions, I always carried around a 3x5 little steno pad in my pocket, because I'd walk, from the back of the plant where I was located to the front, where I had to get my mail or talk to my boss or engage some of the management team, maybe the scheduler. Have 2 or 3 people stop me along the way. Hey, I got this problem, or hey, what about doing this? And if I didn't write it down, I'd usually forget it, or at least forget, a number of them. So that's one thing to help remember it. But the other thing is I write down the person's name, who it was, and whatever the suggestion was, I would get back to them. Hey, yeah, that was a really great idea. We're going to do this. Or, well, not a bad idea, pretty costly. We'll add it to our capital list and maybe it'll get approved, one day. Or, yeah, we really looked at that. I talked to this person, I investigated it by talking to a vendor, maybe some, expert engineer. And it's really not going to work out the best because of whatever. And even if they don't like the answer, they will appreciate the fact that you took the time to research it and get back to them. And they may actually give you another one at some point. So examples, posting communication. Another communication tool I used was, making sure I got my department all together. And most people have 3 shifts. So it's kind of hard to get everybody together. What I did, and it was a little bit challenging for the folks on second shift, is I would have basically require everybody in all 3 shifts to come in like a 7 a.m. in the morning or whatever shift turnover time was. A lot of people over time kind of got used to it because it sort of having all 3 shifts together kind of eliminates some of the finger pointing, like, oh, third shift did this, they didn't tell me about it, or whatever the shifts were. So you get everybody together, kind of really helps create some synergy. They get to know each other a little bit better because they may not see each other very much. And then it also gives you the opportunity to help communicate, how we're doing with our goals. Hey, we're gonna have these capital projects coming up. These are some big events. Maybe even like some HR things, change in benefits, all that type of communication, things that matter to them, and give them an opportunity to kind of put you on the spot and answer questions and talk about issues, that they're seeing and get some feedback, which is really important. I can't emphasize training enough. Do you have like individual training plans? Have you done a gap analysis? One of my plants, we had like one guy that seemed to have all the electrical knowledge, and he didn't. A lot of other people did, but people are happy. Let's just go have Dave do it. Because he does it all the time. And so I created a little training program, and I had Dave do the training. And so we all met in a room, and we talked about each machine. We got out all the schematics for the machines, went through them. Then I did another phase where we went out to the machine. We took all the schematics, looked at open control panels and looked at them, made sure people were familiar with all the components and the layout and how the power feed was coming in, those types of things. And we did a third round where we inserted a trouble, and we were able to schedule downtime on the machines and have people go in and actually troubleshoot a problem, to kind of apply their information. So it really helped Dave out a lot. So he didn't feel all that pressure, but, improved overall, particularly off shifts, be able to troubleshoot equipment, not just have, one person. And management buy-in is key. One thing I think of is like PM plans. So, 2 of my plants I went to, they are really lacking in most areas. One didn't even have a CMMS. One had some written PM plans, but only covered about half the equipment. I had a really hard time finding evidence that we're doing, monthly PMs and annual PMs. So that's kind of low-hanging fruit. But you have to get your management to buy in on it. And first you have to create the program. You have to communicate to everybody. And it can't just be a one person, creating all the tasks and all the things. You can't just go to the O&M manual and just copy and paste. Okay, this is what we're going to do. That's usually not that cost effective. It really should be reliability based on failures. Obviously take the OEM as input, and include operations, on that. The buy-in really needs to be with your scheduler. Like, I don't know how many times I'd have this weekly plan, have a machine every day of the week, and then it breaks down, the day before the PM scheduled. It's like, it's already down. You don't want to do the PM necessary during that time because you want to get the machine up. And so you just have to kind of, take that lump. And when it does happen, I would go to my scheduler and say, well, okay, what machine is available? What else can we do? And then I wouldn't leave his office until we would reschedule the machine, that went down and we couldn't do till we had another date. And maybe we bumped the schedule around with some other machines, whatever it was. But if you don't reschedule it, a week could go by. I mean, schedule's not going to come to you and say, oh yeah, Lee, now you can go do that PM with all the variables that they're dealing with. So that's kind of partly engaging the workforce, but it's not just maintenance folks, it's operations, too. Some other areas, it might be headcount. How well do you track your overtime? And, is there a range of what overtime should be? Are certain people getting a lot more overtime than others? Is it a union environment? Do you have to schedule the overtime? And only certain people, can get it. So you may need to really evaluate your head count. And it may not only be just that percentage of overtime, but it might be based on certain skills. So one of my plants that I was in, we had like one person that really knew PLCs and had training in it. And we had a lot of PLCs, so we started like, well, what's the list? Identify what they all are, because we didn't even have a list, when I got there. And then what training is available. And some of them are some really old, like Modicons and different things that had been obsolete for a few years. So I need to be part of the capital planning, upgrading them. But once we identified what they are and looked at, what training was available, and did like a train to trainer. So I like send one guy to this training and not just have one person go to it, but kind of even it out, because there's a lot of people really like to learn. And the more you talk to them, then you kind of know who those are, how interested they are, and how much development, personal development they want to go through. And then they come back, and then you have a group, you schedule training, you go out and look at it, go through troubleshooting. And if you don't do something like that after the school, then people are just going to lose it, right? If they don't use it, after 6 months, or maybe in a couple months, they're going to forget a lot of what they learned. So you really have to make sure that there's a plan of them to execute and go through that training and look at it. Recording your RCM wins. So what have you done to show me the money? That's one thing manager wants to know. And when you first go into a plant, it may be easy because you may have one like I did where, we didn't really have like national agreements. We had all kinds of different vendors. Maybe you were following strictly what the OEM recommended, which is usually a little bit over the top. My analogy usually is how many people, and I know there's some people who do this, but how many people really follow the maintenance manual in your car? Do you actually check off, okay, I did this, I did this, I changed my brake fluid, you do all these things. Oh, 50,000 miles, by God, I gotta go change my tires. 3 years, I gotta go change my battery, though it may last 4 or 5 years. So you have to kind of temper that a little bit, and hopefully in your database, you have failures in a history where you can kind of adjust those time periods and whatnot. You kind of look at your condition-based maintenance. And as you develop all that, and people see, hey, we're actually saving money, in the beginning, maybe be a little bit more, maybe you're not maintaining your equipment like you should. Maybe you need to get the OEMs to come in because you got a lot of problems, or maybe to increase the knowledge of people. So sometimes I would have one of the OEM technicians come in, and they would spend 4 hours, maybe the whole day, just on training, so they would learn that machine a lot better. And it definitely always paid off. People's knowledge, even looking at having them review your PMs with you, what am I not doing that I should? And maybe looking at spare parts, am I really carrying the right spare parts that I should? Spare parts is an area that really affects, your department, your people. If they go into your storeroom, you got junk all over the place. Like one plant I had, they had a lot of rolls, they had a lot of stuff on shelves, no idea what they had. There was no CMMS, not even a spreadsheet listing them. Often the maintenance supervisor would order something that we already had that was sitting on the shelf. And so it took quite a process, to get a room set up, get a CMMS, get all that set up. But then, they could actually go look up, and say, oh yeah, it's supposed to be located on the shelf, go there and grab it. It just saved a lot of time. Nobody likes to sit there and hunt through and move things around and try to find, the parts. And, where the operators say, well, when are you going to fix this thing? And hearing from everybody, when you have a big inefficiency in a process like that. Um, I think a big part of culture is your personal development as a leader. You know, how do you keep track of, well, maybe suggestions like I mentioned earlier, but how do you keep track of other things and activities and your goals and whatnot and communicate that? And then when you say you're going to do something, do you do it? Or people say, well, you know, hey, Lee said he's going to do this, but it's been a year and nothing's ever been said about it. That doesn't really help the culture and the credibility of what you do. So it's really important that you do what you say you're going to do. And if you're not going to do it, then don't say you're going to do it. You know, it's okay to say, well, I'll look into it. I evaluate it. But if you're actually going to do it, you know, just make sure that you do. And then when you have a machine down, you know, how do you communicate? You know, is it all hands on deck? You know, do you have maybe a certain team? You know, this is the emergency team. You know, that replies to all the breakdowns, or do you have a different group that just happens to be whoever's on shift? You know, gets a call on the radio and they go respond to it. And then, okay, you get out, you're troubleshooting it. You know, do you go out and look at it? How visible are you? You know, are you communicating with the supervisor? You know, did the operations people say, well, you know, it's broke, so they just send them somewhere else? So the maintenance guy gets there and he has no idea what's wrong. You know, having that continuity of somebody explain it, you know, maybe getting some of the troubleshooting, you need somebody for operations, help run the machine or turn part of it over. And of course, the schedulers needs to kind of keep updated so they can let the shipping people know. You know, might have to let the customer know the order may be late. You know, how you deal with that makes a big impact, not only in the plant internally, but your customer base. You know, they know you're on top of it. You're gonna get this thing, you know, up as soon as possible. And have you really looked at other options? You know, is a part of the machine that you just can't run without? You know, can you cannibalize, you know, from something else? Is there an alternative to at least limp along, help her run and get the production out till you make a permanent repair? So it's really machine specific and kind of looking at, you know, what the alternatives are and the options. And then I kind of call them, you know, bad apples. You know, sometimes there's just some people who just don't seem to want to get on board. I take you know, back to the training. When I got to one of my plants, and it was a union plant, they had negotiated a full training program, and it was incentivized by, you know, increased wages. And it was probably for the different levels. You know, they had like an A, B, C, and then, well, CBA with A being the highest, and they actually had a double A levels. And those are all negotiated $2 to $3 an hour more for each one of those levels. And it was, before it kind of been like a good old boy thing. The supervisor said, oh yeah, okay, I think you're a C. Yeah, I think you're a B, but there's no right criteria. And this is actually kind of a corporate driven thing they had laid out. You had to look at your different manufacturers, your own equipment, on some of the skills that you needed. But it was kind of a guideline, a certain checklist, you know, like, you know, does he understand motor theory? You know, can he troubleshoot? You know, does he know brakes and clutches and all the components of mechanical stuff? You know, does he have all the safety, you know, requirements down? And all these were in a checklist. And I can remember going to our union president, you know, who looked like, you know, nothing against folks who ride motorcycles, but he's like a Hell's Angel kind of guy. And he came across that way, which I'm not. So he kind of had that clash a little bit. And I was new, and I've been there a few months. And they're like, oh, he just asked me all kinds of questions. And eventually I said, well, it's negotiating a contract and we're going to do it. And so I met with, you know, all my maintenance guys, kind of laid it out. A lot of questions. You know, they're very apprehensive. It was you could be grandfathered and not have to partake in it. And I get, you know, so I got a couple of them that said, yeah, you know, we're interested. So I started them through the process. I had one guy, took him about 2 years before he decided to do it. Another individual who was ranked at a B level. And so I got out, you know, a schematic, and I started, you know, I asked him, okay, well, what's this? You know, show him resistors and capacitors and different symbols, and he didn't know very much at all. And I told him, I said, you're not a B-level guy. You're really a C-level guy. We're going to have to, if you're going to go into this program, you're going to have to be basically bumped down to a new C and progress through this. And he didn't think that was fair. And so he ended up, bidding out of the department. Hated to lose him. I mean, he stayed in production, did a good job, but just one of those things that you have to kind of stick to your guns, set the expectations, and then follow through with it. Yeah, let me actually go back here. And another example, and this wasn't really something that I personally did, but I watched one of our managers. There was a guy that we had, his name was Bob, out on a machine, and he just complained all the time. And he was really kind of a thorn in the whole workforce. And again, it was a union shop. And my boss somehow worked it out and talked to this guy, gave him a severance package. And I don't know how he did it because that wasn't really negotiable, in a union contract. And ended up, having a guy, leave the plant. And it actually made a big difference when he left. And then the individual who I mentioned, came off of Harley Davidson. I mean, he ended up leaving the plant, and we got a new union management, whole team. And when we first got there, we were losing money, and after a couple of years of being there, because we had a new plant manager started a couple of years before me and hired me in, and together we did a lot to help improve the equipment, from breaking down and different processes. And we had union management meetings. It wasn't just a big bitch session about, why management didn't do this and that, but it ended up being more of, hey, I'm kind of noticing this in my work center. I think we could do some improvements, maybe in the conveyor system to do this and that. And yeah, it was really kind of nice to be part of that, where you go through that process. You see what it used to be like to what it can be. Another thing that I personally did, I think kind of helped a lot, was we were going to get a new machine. It's going to be our largest machine. It's going to take a couple other processes and combine them into one machine. And it was like, well, where are we going to put this thing? And so I had somebody come in and kind of did a drawing of the plant. And we had the layout. We had like little machines we move around, and did a whole bunch of analysis on the impact and how the flow would go of the product, coming off our main corrugating machine, and how it would feed all the machines. And I was just one guy, right? So I was in charge of the project. I was in charge of maintenance, basically like a plant engineer. I had to put together, get all the vendors, get all the quotes, do all that stuff. So one thing that I did was I had every work center a meeting, and I would lay out the project. I would say, this is what we're doing. This is how it might affect you. This is how we're planning on like setting up maybe, some auxiliary parts of the machine, how you would lay out certain parts of, where the power comes in, where the control panel is, where their workstation is, all those types of things that impact them on a daily basis. And I went through the whole plant. I think I took 3 or 4 weeks. I think I probably had close to 20 meetings. I even included the shipping guys. I included every department. And I was just amazed at all the input. Just amazed that the guys out there, even though they hadn't like seen the machine, they hadn't run that machine, but it was a similar process to other machines. All the ideas they had, and it really helped a lot. I ended up adding different things that we ended up buying, to help things better. And, and then it just kind of went through corporate a lot better because we really done our homework. So that type of engagement and seeing somebody that was management, so to speak, I was a supervisor at the time, listening to people and taking that into effect. And it makes a big difference in a plant when you go through those kinds of things. Um, so I really believe the culture can be changed, and you have to be a change agent, I think, and you have to, look at your goals and how you're doing things, and kind of be a prophet in a way. In my current role, I worked about 25 years in manufacturing, and then I went to this data center industry, which is a little interesting story. I wasn't really looking for a job, and some guy calls me and says, "Hey, I work for this raging wire company. We're a data center company." And I'm like, "Well, what's a data center?" Because I really didn't have a lot of details. I didn't understand, what they did and everything. And so, yeah, we have equipment, and, we want to develop a maintenance reliability program. The first thing I thought of, data, it's like servers and stuff. Like, why aren't you like trying to get some IT guy? Why are you talking to a mechanical engineer? He goes, "Oh no, we have all this equipment." And they do. We got all kinds of generators. Yeah, we got a lot of electrical equipment, UPSs, whatnot, a lot of chillers, cooling towers, a lot of HVAC stuff. Hey, we want you to create, this program. And data centers is reliability is not much of a thing, as I've learned over the last 6 years. And so I've tried to get involved in, like, well, how do we cross-pollinate across? How do we get people to realize that how you design things, If I'm going to go order a switchboard, there's no IR windows in it. And if I ever want to IR scan that thing, I got to like either take the customer down or figure out some way of doing that. A lot of people just didn't really understand that, the impact and all the programs that can exist, that you should be doing. Like another example is medium voltage transformers. We have a lot of them. It's like some of the sites may have like 20, 25 generators and different lines to supply of like a 36 megawatt building. And every generator has its own line, its own medium voltage transformer to feed, that line. And the sample valve and cap was like inside the enclosure, so you can't get in there to do your annual oil samples. And so I'm like, that's kind of crazy. And for whatever reason, about the time I started, they started having, those extended out, where you can actually get to them. But other ones didn't, so we went and bought these units from this company that extended it out, brought the gauge out, so you can see like, what the nitrogen pressure was and the temperature and stuff like that. But those are types of things that, the company, and not just your maintenance people and not just operations, you have to look at it like supply chain. Do they understand? They're part of the culture. The people who do all the capital planning, they need to be part of the culture. All the financial people, as you're justifying capital, justifying your budget, all those things have, an impact on how well you can introduce reliability and perform it and accomplish things. And sometimes it may be more of a corporate thing. Maybe your corporate people, spec out, different machines because there's so many of them, and they use all that leverage and, quantities, reduce the pricing and whatnot. So those are things to them. And those are a lot of good examples. Actually, that's most of the things that I was going to kind of cover. So I'm hoping there's lots of good questions. Be happy to answer any of them. And I really appreciate your time this morning. It's a great topic, but it can be changed. Thank you. All right, Robin, we have some questions.
All right, Lee, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what was going on. I thought both of us had great weather today. So let's start out with, we have several questions. I hope you're ready. So the first question I have, can we quantify the effect of culture between productivity, safety, reliability, and product quality?
Wow.
That's a tough one to start out with.
I don't know how you could quantify it except going from point A to point B over a longer period of time, like a year, 2, 3 years, implement things and look back. I mean, I'm sure there's like minute little changes you can make. I think a lot of, like Ron Moore, he's got that book, Common Sense. It's a really great book, and he really has done some studies on safety and reliability. So I think for those two, there's definitely a link there. And of all the studies he's done, a lot, OSHA recordables and whatnot, and your reliability, there's a definite relationship there, to watch things improve. Yeah, I wish there was like a key indicator, but I think you have to kind of just look at all the programs and look at your budget and all those key performance indicators that you use, and just over several years. I know in my first plant they had an awful lot of, I was a young buck, right? I'm in my early 30s, and everybody's like 50 and above, and it took a while. It took 3-4 years before they really kind of respected and saw the evidence of where we were going. Like organized a storeroom, got a PM plan going, started looking at predictive maintenance, all those things. But over a 3-4 year period, you kind of look at, hey, this is what my budget's doing. This is the culture. This is our downtime, which is the key. And this is our yield, our productivity, how much we're shipping out the door and our profit. And they did go up. So I think it's incremental thing, and you just can't bite off too much that you chew in the beginning. Expect instant results, gratification, like a lot of Americans do.
And the next question, we have several. The next question is in line with something you and I were talking about before we started the session today, and that is, dealing with detractors and blockers. And the specific question is, how do you identify bad apples on the management team, and how do you deal with them quickly and effectively?
Yes. When I was in the Navy, I had one of my petty officers who just complained all the time. I mean, it was constant. Every meeting, every training, he would interrupt. And one day I said to him, Pastor Moore, I go, I'll bet if I gave you next week off for vacation, you'd complain about it. And he said, yeah. He said, I don't want next week. I want a different week. And it really hit me. And some people are just that way. That's just their nature. So somehow you have to channel that, figure out what it is that you can get them, whatever their touch point is, if it's, what is a real dissatisfaction, is it a promotion? Is it not enough work? Are they not trained? Hopefully you can come up with something there. And at some point, they probably need to move on, whether it's in a different department, maybe it kind of assess their background, something that fits them better. I've told a couple of folks that, I'm not sure this is the right company for you, and sometimes they would come around, and they realized I wasn't just going to stand by and absorb all this negativity, and then so that's going down. So if you go up and you have other, maybe it's a peer, maybe it's a fellow manager that just doesn't seem eye to eye. So maybe you can try to, go get a beer with them. Maybe you try to go golfing with them. You can try those types of things. Find something common, maybe a common sports team, or that might not be a negative, if you're rivals.
So basically try to get that other person to see you as human, and you see them as human, and maybe you can get past that a generalization that's causing them to maybe be a cog in the wheel.
Yeah, I think part of it is them seeing that you got your stuff together, that you're making a difference, And that if there's something that hopefully you're doing to help them, right? I mean, production should be maybe like the customer, and maybe, yeah, hey, what can I do to help your job, and depending upon what it is, maybe you can, maybe you can't, but that might be another way to approach it. Hopefully you don't have to end up going over his head, to your plant manager or whatever level that is, because that usually isn't the best. Plant managers like to see everybody get together and work together.
And what about checklist? Have you seen examples, or do you have any thoughts on maybe establishing a troubleshooting checklist that helps solve problems, culture problems?
Well, I think if you look at culture and trying to, reduce downtime, reduce your problems, checklists are invaluable. Besides like a PM checklist, like one of my plants, we had steam boilers, and if we would lose our natural gas, then we had to switch over to fuel oil. So do you have a detailed checklist that you've walked through, you've exercised step by step so that anybody could come in and follow it and be able to do that? And as part of the checklist, do you have all the tools you need? Do you have the right wrench, to operate, special valves, whether it's under maybe your fire system, different things like that. What I learned is there's a lot of auxiliary systems, like maybe air makeup units that provide air to the plant, your fire pump, your fire systems, your natural gas, all those kind of utilities and things that come in that, until the lights go out, nobody really cares, right? If you lose electricity, are you actually doing a PM in your high voltage substation? One of my plants, they never did any maintenance on the transformers or whatnot. So I think those good places for checklists. One, training and educate people on what's there. Make sure maybe your emergency power organization, for emergencies that, if we had a certain thing like a loss of power simulating, do I got somebody going back where the power comes in and verify, what the problem is on the switchboards, and have people identified in maintenance to go out and, to the problem and identify it. So it's kind of a checklist, but it's also a procedure, to cover those kinds of things that really kind of can impact the whole plant. So I hope I answered that question.
Well, we have more coming at you. How, as a rule, maintenance teams are usually long-term teams that have worked together. How do you get site leadership to build into a change in culture is also having having succession planning?
So like my first plant I got to out of the Navy, where I was a young guy, we had all the people, 50 years and older, and what happened there was they had actually fired the maintenance supervisor before me. So it's kind of like there's no way to go but up, but you have to establish yourself first of all, with your team. And hey, there's going to be changes, and this is going to kind of be the way it is. And I think that the management, since they hired you, hopefully will support all of that. And I know some of my guys actually went to the union and said, hey, this, McClish guy who's making us do this and that. And of course, I'm following, good leadership practices. I'm not violating anything in the contract, treating people fair. And so they went to the union management meeting, and they had a session talking about, Lee McClish. And afterwards, our general manager and my boss, our production manager, they had to sit down with me and like, you're doing a pretty good job. You're getting her attention, making some good changes and whatnot. So it was easy, with that point of view. In another plant I joined, they had a merger, and they had two about the same size companies come together when I worked for Graphic Packaging. And the position I was in was a brand new one. They had a maintenance supervisor, but they made me what's called the RCM, manager. And this guy had been there 40, I think actually like 45 years, but there's a lot of corporate initiatives and things that we had to do that was It just had to be done, and he didn't have the skills and the background really to do it. So I was able to work with him and kind of make the necessary changes to satisfy what we needed to get done. And the management already kind of, bought off on it because that's kind of what they wanted done. So you have to just kind of work your way through the culture and just try one thing and then try something else and just go from one thing to the next until you finally, get that right yes button.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
All right. Do you have additional personal examples you can share of how you affected culture change quickly? Is it possible to do it quickly?
One thing that I hope is doing a survey. So like, I think my first month in my first plant, we didn't get a whole lot of work orders. And so I created a form. Say, here, fill this out because, they didn't allow operators to enter work orders. And so I eventually changed that, had them do work requests, and then we had work orders, which is the way it really should be. Nobody filled them darn forms out, not a one. And so, you talk about a monthly communication meeting and whatnot. It took a long time to kind of steer that, but I did a survey to find out not just why they weren't filling work orders out, but hey, operations, what don't you like about, maintenance? And I really got some pretty candid, good feedback. And so I think when people saw changes, hey, we're going to do this now, we're going to do that now. Maybe we had like a zone maintenance. You had certain people tagged. Like one maintenance guy would have like 6 machines, and he was to be visible there. He'd do all the PMs, make sure we had the spare parts. Maybe there's a lot of personality conflicts. I had to like move, a guy to a different department. People see those kinds of things. And I think a lot of it is them seeing you approachable where they're going to give you ideas. But I think that's probably one of the biggest things you can do in the beginning is set the expectations, have a written plan, and have communicated and shared it, and then just start doing it. Any other questions?
I think that is it. Thank you so much for your time today, Lee. We appreciate you being here. For everyone that is with us, thank you for being here today. We appreciate you joining. We have a really solid lineup for our 2024 best practices this year. And our next event is on February 21st, where we will be joined by Michael DeMaria to discuss Azima. Michael's been with us before. And as a quick FYI, before you drop from GoToWebinar, you will see a brief survey that will pop up. It's a 30-second survey, pardon me. Please take time to give us some feedback today so we can continue to improve on our offerings. Thank you so much to everyone that was here today. Lee, as always, thank you for your insight today, and we will talk again soon.